Hello, and welcome to the Find Creative Expression podcast, conversations about art and creativity. I'm your host, Sarah Crawford, author, playwright, musician, basically obsessed with art. You can find more information at findcreativeexpression.com. Let's get rolling. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 25 of the Find Creative Expression podcast. Coming up, I have an interview with writer Aryn Huck. We had a really awesome conversation about his writing process, so definitely stick around for that. Okay, y'all, I have been super creative lately. In the past week, I've made 2 decoupage, collage pieces, one in honor of my cat, Frank, who is no longer with us, and the other in honor of my cat, Julian, who just turned 15. So I made a TikTok video with this process, which I actually thought was pretty cool. So I will link to that on findcreativeexpression.com if you would like to check it out. Also, I started crocheting again. I started making what is going to be a rainbow blanket. Last time I made a blanket, it took me like 3 years off and on. So I wasn't working on it the whole time. So, hopefully this time I'll have it done in time for Pride Month next year, or maybe the year after that. We'll see. So I've also been working on my novel. I'm not really working on the play anymore. I've kind of put that on hold for a minute. So I'm doing this thing where I work on the novel a little bit every day. So even if, some days I'll just write one sentence or do some brief revisions, it keeps me in the world of the novel every day. So I've been coloring in my adult coloring book. I've been trying to cook new things. This past weekend, I even had this idea that I was going to paint along with Bob Ross. So I had his show on Hulu so I could pause it. I started out painting what he was painting, but then, it didn't take me long at all to just start doing my own abstract thing because I don't have the Bob Ross skills. But I just had so much fun in the creation process and just painting what I felt like painting without caring at all what the final result would be. I'm always talking about that, like the act of creation and how it's more important sometimes than the creation itself. But, I don't always give myself the time or the space to just create and not even try to be quote unquote good. So it was really cool for me to actually do that. So here's what I'm into lately. I am finishing up reading 10 by Candace Robinson and Amber R. Duell. Candace was on the podcast a couple of episodes ago. So this is book 1 in the Faeries of Oz series. This book was super fun. It's definitely not your grandma's Wizard of Oz. So I would say it's kind of new adult-ish. And, if you're opposed to curse words or, steamy scenes, maybe don't pick this one up. But otherwise, I thought it was really entertaining and just an interesting take on the Wizard of Oz characters. Kind of reminded me of Wicked a little bit. I mean, not really the content, but just that idea of spinning off a classic story that everyone knows. I also just finished watching this sitcom on Peacock called Girls 5 Eva. It has Sarah Bareilles in it, and also the woman who played Angelica in the original cast of Hamilton, Renee Elise Goldsberry. It's about this girl band that was popular in the early 2000s, kind of that TRL era. And a rapper samples their song, which causes them to get back together. Except, now they're all like 40 and one of them is a dentist and one of them is pretending to be an influencer, but really she has a job shooting geese at the airport. Anyway, I thought it was just a really funny show, especially, since I graduated high school in 2003. So I really remember that, time period. I also really just like shows about musicians or artists. And, I just thought it was really fun. So definitely check that out. I will link to both of those things on findcreativeexpression.com as well. All right, so I want y'all to hear the interview, so let's get to it. Hey everyone, I am here with Aryn Huck. Aryn Huck is a writer and a poet from Lincoln, Nebraska, also working as a copywriter and technical writer. In his creative work, he writes in multiple genres. Many of their works include teen characters as well as LGBTQ plus characters. Welcome, Aryn.
Hello. Thank you for having me here, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. Episode 25. That's like a whole quarter. So how did you get into writing?
I got into writing in how some people are like, I feel like I've been writing forever. I did start writing at a pretty young age. I think I was 10 when I came up with, a whole idea for a series of novels, right. Which sounds very nerdy, but I think a lot of other writers, did something similar at that kind of young age.
Yeah. No, I used to write Disney fan fiction if we want to talk about being nerdy. So
yeah. And well, this. I've talked about this before that I wrote fan fiction, and I may come back to it someday. But I wrote fan fiction all through high school and all through college. And that was really the biggest area that I was writing for a long time, was writing these fan fiction stories, which I'm a big proponent of. I think it lets you be really creative in a world that's already there, and then you kind of take it for a spin.
Right. Yeah, I think of fan fiction kind of like cover songs, for musicians, because it's it kind of helps you to figure out, your voice and tone and different things you want to do in your writing, but yeah, it's already with, established worlds, established characters. I'm really a fan of fan fiction, But yeah, I was thinking about this recently because I was reading Tin by Candace Robinson and Amber R. Duell. And that's a kind of a spin on the Wizard of Oz. And, I was thinking about Wicked and it's interesting how fan fiction of Harry Potter or, more modern properties is just considered fan fiction. But then if you do a spin on something kind of more classic, it's not, I don't know. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. It's if I can control how long I live, I want to live long enough so that I can publish fan fiction of stuff I wrote,
Right. Yeah.
And just, it's a public domain area that I love stuff that once things enter into the public domain, everyone just goes wild. We saw it with Sherlock Holmes when it entered the public domain, and we're seeing it this year really with the Great Gatsby.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask about your writing process.
Yes.
So, in case anyone listening doesn't know, a plotter is someone who really outlines and plans their stories before they write. And then a pantser is someone who flies by the seat of their pants, more of a discovery writer. So in your writing process, are you more of a plotter or a pantser?
I'm a pantser. I'm just a mess. If you hear the nervousness in my voice, it's because I'm just a ball of organized chaos. I really tried to be more organized as of late to plot out some stuff. And I think everyone, even if you're a plotter or a pantser, you kind of you're always a little bit of a mix of both.
Right.
And you always like, if you are a pantser where you kind of write what you feel, you're still like thinking ahead,
Mm.
to what you're going to write next. I've tried to be a little bit more intentional as of late, just because I am revising my novel now that, I want to finish it. So I want to think more in that kind of plotter sense to say, okay, what do I have and what gaps do I still need to fill?
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I sometimes I try to be a plotter, but it never really works out for
It
me.
just
So,
falls apart. Yeah.
yeah, I tend to write a lot of stuff that doesn't end up in the final version of the
Hmm.
novel, but that can be kind of like an interesting exercise because it's kind of like you really get to know your characters, I think, when you do it that way. I mean, it
Yeah.
also takes like wastes a lot of time, but that's okay. So do you write to music or do you need silence? Like, do you like to write away from people or like in a busy coffee shop, like when there's not a pandemic going on?
I need something to keep me focused. If I'm going to be like serious about what I'm writing, I have a little like Pandora station that I built like at the beginning of college to help me focus when I was like writing or when I was doing homework. And that Pandora station that it's like private to myself. I've just called it like writer's block. It just has a lot of like music that doesn't have lyrics, so it's a lot of like movie scores, instrumental pieces.
Right.
Um, that always kind of gets me in the mood. And on that same vein of needing that focus space, I typically like to write away from people. Like in my office where I'm at right now, I don't see anybody, which is good because I'm very easily distracted.
Right. Yeah, so sometimes I'm very much like that. I like to just kind of be alone. But sometimes, I mean, I haven't done this in a while, obviously, but I used to really like to just like go to the coffee shop and
Mhm.
write. Like I tend to like get really focused on what I'm doing and then I just kind of block everything out.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes I think that ambiance really, really helps.
I want to be someone who can write in a coffee shop, who enjoys the ambiance and could like meet up with friends at a coffee shop and write, but it doesn't work out for me. Like I want it desperately, but it's just not who I am in my nature.
Well, I mean, that's okay. Hey, you know what works. So that's good, I think. So is there like a time of day that you feel you're more creative or, can write with like clearer head?
Ironically, it will be late at night when I'm already tired. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but like usually like my um, I want to just do this and nothing else happens late at night. Like the sun has gone down, my my partner is asleep. I've tried to push it into the daytime so I can sleep.
Right.
But there's that like magic hour, like that magic time happens after 10:30 p.m.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely have been there before. Yeah, for me it's like it's not really like a specific time of day. Like sometimes I'll be like really productive in the mornings and sometimes I'll, have to get up at 3 in the morning and write something. Like it's just you never know. You never know when inspiration is gonna hit. So, how much are your protagonists like you? Like when writing, do you like to draw from your own life?
Like you had sent this question to me in advance, and I had to kind of think about it. I used to kind of like every character that I was ever going to write, either like first person or like close third with, which generally I write close third perspectives. But like those characters, like I would draw like an emotion or something for myself to kind of like anchor me to the character. I kind of stopped doing that after a bit, but like there are some like old characters that I have that like I just kind of anchored the way, like an emotion that I can relate to and then like amplified it or drew
Right.
that out for a character. I don't necessarily like to draw too much from my own life. Like I don't want to write like a character that is me or a character that is, someone that I know. But I think that every writer has somehow they are related to their character. It's like that emotion or like there's a quirk about them that you share or that you relate to.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like there's definitely something autobiographical about like everything that I write, which is kind of weird because I wrote a lot of like fantasy and like time travel and stuff that obviously can't be autobiographical, but
Yeah, what aren't you telling us? Like what world are you from?
well, no. Yeah, I mean, so I think like every character you write ends up having a piece of you somewhere in there. Like
Mhm.
even villains or like characters that are just really unlikable. Like I feel like there's always some little piece of something that is from you, because
Mhm.
obviously you created it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, self-care is, obviously very important for everyone, but particularly writers because, I know a lot of writers who just have a tendency to kind of get really involved in what they're doing and then they
Mhm.
forget to take care of themselves. Like I've definitely been this way before. So, but this is something I've been trying to kind of like get better about recently, like exercising more and cooking and taking time for myself. So I was just wondering, how do you practice self-care?
For myself, self-care kind of comes in as a bit of reminding myself that like I deserve grace in what I do, that reminding myself that I'm a person and so that means I'm going to mess up, but that doesn't mean I can't do better.
Right.
But also it means that like sometimes, also just to say today wasn't the day, to allow myself that grace to say like I needed this day to do whatever, to kind of try to stop that writer's guilt from building.
Yeah.
And then because I'm just a ball of chaos all the time. What has helped, and I don't know if you kind of like heard about this before, but like another way to like self care, because a lot of people think of it as like, oh, it's like bubble baths or reading a book, but
Right.
sometimes it's also that structural piece to give you something to lean back on. If you
Mm-hmm.
are someone like me who's a bit scatterbrained or a bit disorganized, that having some sort of like schedule that you or like a rhythm you can start to lean on,
Right.
that's very helpful. That, not something that like you have to stick to or you're a failure, but like something that you can say like, okay, well, in the morning, and what I've been trying to do is like I get up and I go for a little walk before it becomes very hot, and
Yeah.
then I start my day. Take my shower, I start my work, and I give myself the space I need to cook and clean and do the work I do at home and write. But having some sort of rhythm to the day um, really helps me like get out of a slump.
Right. Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I think it's also about just like finding whatever it is that is like good for your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if it's just like watching Bob Ross, which I do a lot of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Sometimes that's a really good like activity for my mental health.
yeah.
Plus Bob Ross has, I mean, he knows where it's at. He's like my guru.
He's just so calming. That yeah, I like having that calming stuff that you can either like just watch or put on while you're doing something else. Like I watch a video game streamer, and in his like backlog of stuff is like 300 hours of him playing Minecraft, and of like old live streams. So he's interacting with people who aren't there because it was like, at this point it's 5 years ago that this is from, but it's like just kind of like fun to hear him just kind of like ramble about building giant towers into the sky. That's just like just kind of chill.
Right, right. Yeah, I think there's a tendency, especially in America, to be like, oh, I have to be productive all the time. So it's like, we can kind of feel guilty about like watching reruns of
Mhm.
something or, playing video games or doing something that's not quote unquote productive. But like
Right.
I think there actually is something really productive about taking that time to kind of refresh and recharge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, based on your social media, it seems like you write more fiction than poetry, which
Hmm.
I think is common with a lot of writers that write both, including myself. So, I know I personally have like a different process with poetry. Like, I write it when I'm really trying to process emotions or something difficult that I'm going through. So I was wondering, do you have a different process with writing poems as opposed to writing fiction? Or, does poetry serve kind of a different purpose for you than fiction?
Yeah, for me, like poetry is more that just outlet. I think, like you say, like processing things, though it's not like I don't usually like sit down with an intention to be like, I am going to write this poem, but it'll be like, I'm walking somewhere and I have like a thought that I just can't get out of my head that I jot down, or, I'm about to go to bed, but then I start to think about some things. And so I kind of like write that down in my phone, and then I can move on with my life.
Right.
It's kind of those like spur of the moment, kind of like intense emotional stuff that comes out in poems. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's like I'm like passively writing poetry. I don't. Unlike other people
Yeah.
who actively write poetry.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Cause I mean, I'll go through like phases where I'll write a lot of poetry and then I won't write any for like a
Hmm.
year. So it's like, I mean, I like to read poetry a lot, even when I'm not writing it. But, I think I feel like it's a different creative energy for me.
Yeah, with some of my friends, the most humorous stuff about the poetry that I've written is I've I've written some like just like small like 4-line poems about like public restrooms, that like some friends of mine find to be just absolutely hilarious. Um, so that's like, obviously dwindled over the last year, um, as so much of us have just lived our lives inside.
Yeah.
But just like goofy stuff like that, where you just kind of marvel at like, why are we like this? Like, why are we as humans do we, do this in public spaces?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Not a lot of that in the last year. It's like, oh, I'm gonna write a poem about this lamp that I've been looking at for 5 hours.
yeah.
So you're documenting revising your current novel on Twitter. So first of all, a lot of these tweets were like cracking me up because I could relate to them so much.
They're very stream of consciousness.
I know, like how you said, like, oh, your novel was like falling apart after chapter 5. And I was like, oh my God, that's so me. And how you had to go back and take out so many instances with the words feel and seemed and looked. And I feel like I do that all the time. See, I just did it now. I feel like I do that all the time. But yeah, so I also really loved your revision like tracker board that you had. I really admire that you're sharing your revision process like that. And I was wondering, has documenting this helped your revision process at all?
I think it has. I think that, like writing can feel so insular, like so private.
Mhm.
A lot of writers, we're like afraid, rightfully. I'm not saying like it's a bad, like we all get it. If you listen to this and you're a writer, I'm not calling you out. Please understand. But like, we often feel like, we don't want to share this. We're afraid to share with other people because it is so raw and it takes so much time, to make this thing that then you're like, if anyone looks at it and is mean about it, I'll cry. So kind of like documenting my revision is a little bit of like a public way to talk about it, to kind of like put it out there for like, friends who are reading it, writer friends who read it, just to also be like, I feel like I am telling someone that I'm doing the thing.
Right.
And it helps me continue to do the stuff. to do that writing, just because it feels less like it's all in my head and more like it is happening out in the world, which I think is kind of helping me to also start to get used to the idea that like at some point this is not going to be all in my head or on my computer. Like the goal is to get it out there. But yeah, and it's fun to also like have kind of some documented progress to look back on to see like, oh, this is what I was thinking at this time, or like, oh, remember when I was revising this chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Sarah, you mentioned that I have this whiteboard that I'm tracking my revision on. It's a very small whiteboard, but it has 3 columns that say done and then in progress as initials, and then on deck. And there's too many sticky notes on there. There's a lot of sticky notes, but it became this very physical manifestation of my novel, which again had been either digital or in my brain. So it was just like having that was nice to organize things in a very physical, visible way. So I can actually see, and then I can, get that fun achiever, like heartwarming feel of moving something physically from one column to the other.
Right.
Yeah. Plus, I feel like I've started leaving myself like additional sticky notes that are like, hey, you're worried you're going to forget about this. So
Yeah.
here's the thing you're worried about forgetting. This is where it is. If you ever want to, retrieve something from an old draft, that's where it is. But you're leaving it behind. But don't feel bad.
Right, right. Yeah, I've started kind of like writing myself post-it notes when I'm in the middle of drafting, and if I like have an idea like, oh, maybe my character has a sister, and then like I don't want to go back through the first 50 pages and revise that right then, but like I just want to like make a note of like, oh, she didn't have a sister before the first 50 pages,
Yeah.
So I'll remember to like go back and put it in later. So yeah, I'm a big fan of post-its, and it's a good tool, I think. So you write a lot of LGBTQ plus characters, and I think we're in an exciting time because we're really starting to see more representation across the board in books and TV and movies, and we're also starting to see more stories told by marginalized groups. So for those of us who are allies, especially those of us who are storytellers, like, what do you think we can do to help amplify stories told by LGBTQ plus authors?
I want to first just start off by saying I'm just one opinion. I myself am a transgender person. I'm transmasculine, non-binary. So you've heard Sarah use my pronouns as he, him. I also use they, them. I'm a bisexual person, so I have these identities that fall under the umbrella, but I can't speak for necessarily what's going to be like the best thing out there. And a lot of people have a lot of ideas about this.
Right.
I think as far as like what we can do to help just like amplify these queer stories, especially by out queer authors, is read them. You don't have to buy every book. I think some people get overwhelmed to think then like I have to buy. Am I buying all these books? Go to your library. Technically, you did buy the library books, with your taxes. So technically, you've already done the work. But go to your local library and ask about a copy of a book you thought was interesting. Sharing things you see on social media is a great way to just spread the word about books that you think sound cool that are by LGBT authors or are about LGBT characters. I think also just keeping in mind that sometimes you don't always know what the author identifies as.
Right.
If there's a cool queer story out there that you're like, I liked this, not to get too hung up over who wrote it, but to share that with the world. Like you said, like we're starting to see a lot of representation, and the cool thing about seeing representation is now there's like a market for LGBT lit.
Right.
More so than there ever has been. So just being a part of that like marketing cog to just like share what you see, read the things that sound interesting to you, talk about the stories that you've read that feature queer characters or feature queer authors. And then also like if you're a writer who's also an ally, like we're in your world, right? We're in
Right.
the world we share as people, but we as LGBT people are also in your like written world as well. Whether or not you acknowledge us, you can be a good ally by just starting somewhere and including us in your world. I know a lot of people get worried about including identities that they don't have.
Right.
But again, there's going to be people who have different opinions about this for different identities. I'm specifically talking about my, like, queer identities, and this is just my opinion.
Right. Right.
Having us as characters is important. Being able to see us as characters is important. If you're ever super worried about something, that's when you talk to someone who shares that identity. You have them proofread it. You have them sensitivity read.
Right.
If you're like, I just don't know enough, start reading, attend a local LGBT organizations like events, attend a book reading by a queer author. There's lots of ways to just get connected that I think people can and should get connected, whether or not you're part of the LGBT community.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking about, amplifying stories by LGBTQ plus authors. And, a part of that is some people aren't comfortable to like come out necessarily, but like maybe they have queer characters and, and so I have seen like pressure on like Twitter for like some authors to like come out, like literary agents or publishers will be like, oh, you really need to like come out so you can be this LGBTQ author. And I don't think that's like, I don't think we should be putting pressure on anybody. Like I feel like everybody should just kind of like express and identify with how they're comfortable at the time. And like it's all about timing and whenever it works for you. And I think in general, just like people just need to chill with like pressuring people to do anything. Like just come on, just calm down.
Yeah, kind of like you wouldn't pressure someone in person in real life to do something that maybe they're not ready for. Like I think that's one of the things that gets kind of hard with like the internet, with kind of just like this little bit of like erosion of a barrier where people feel like they might be owed something that someone else has or has not said. I know recently the author of the Love Simon book, the book that became Love Simon,
Right.
Simon versus the Homo sapien agenda.
Homo sapien, right.
Yeah, there we go. That, she wrote that book and didn't fully, at the time, even completely like realize where her identity was. And then with writing more, then she became more and more comfortable to identify it as bisexual, I believe is what she's talked about, her identifying as. And it kind of spiraled into this thing where then she felt like she had to come out because people wanted, I understand that some people wanted to have a queer story by queer people, but there's also those out there, there are people who are open about who they are. If that's super important to the books you read, you can find those authors. But there's also authors who are queer but closeted or are just supportive in writing these stories. And if you like the story, that's the important part. Yeah, I think sometimes people forget like authors are also people, despite the success that they've had, and in their personal life or even as an author, it can be dangerous to come out. All over, if we're talking about the United States, all over, you can get fired from your job still. Legal protections are a little wonky there. I know we had the Supreme Court decision recently that helped to protect against employment discrimination, but we need a little bit of like codifying in the laws.
Yeah.
Or like you can get evicted from where you're living. You can be denied loans, all sorts of stuff. So the personal safety of a writer, I think, is important. And I think that also, like, I'm not one to be unhappy with more queer characters out there. I hope that people don't write them in ways that harm the community.
Right.
But if you're writing like a good queer character, not necessarily like you have to be a hero, but you know, a queer character who's like not gonna make people come after LGBT people with pitchforks. If you're just writing queer characters, they're part of your world, villains, heroes, adventurers, dragons, I don't know. Like I love that. Like I want it to be more like we can see ourselves in fiction, like we see ourselves in the real world.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's important. So I was wondering, are there like I know you know you feature a lot of like queer characters,
Mm-hmm.
but when you're writing, are there like themes that you tend to return to?
I think thematically, I'm looking a lot at like kind of like identity and purpose. The kind of like the question of like responsibility or like what should you do? What is the world like? What do you owe the world, and what does the world owe you? As kind of like big picture themes, things that you know I kind of explore just those kind of big questions that have to do with how you, a character or you, a person, kind of fit into the world.
Right, right. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. Yeah, I think also, you know, sometimes you don't really realize what themes you come back to until like someone else points it out,
Yeah.
you know.
Where they're like, everything I've read from you has to do with XYZ, you know?
Yeah. Somebody is, you know, well, lots of people have said to me, like, Sarah, why do you write so much about like people like drinking or like having addiction? And I'm like, I don't know. I just, it's just something I come back to. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's kind of, I feel like we kind of write about things that we are interested in exploring and things that we kind of need to learn ourselves maybe.
Mhm.
And I mean, who knows? We probably write for all kinds of reasons, but
Yeah.
so you know, you notice most of the questions that I've asked you have been about creative process and the writing process, because yeah, I'm really starting to see that the process of creating a story or a poem or a song or whatever it is a lot more important than the way that it's shared with people.
Mhm.
For me anyway. So having said that though, I am curious, like with so many options for writers, especially with indie publishing and traditional publishing and small presses and everything, have you given any thought to like publishing goals that you have or how you might want to share your work in the future?
Can you like edit in just like a horror movie scream? Uh, I'm futurely sighted and inept. I had to think about this one just because I like publishing wise, I would like to be published. That's my goal. I would like to be able to go that way. I think more of, I mean, like ideally something that was more kind of like traditional or small.
Mhm.
But also like there's so many indie publishers now that like I feel like my understanding of like the indie publishing has like definitely shifted over the last couple of years to understand that there's a lot of people out there who know what they're doing, even at small presses or indie presses. I just know that I will not be doing it myself.
Yeah.
I would like there to be, you know, a team to support the marketing and the writing of the book. Cause I think if I was a little bit too much tied to its like outright success, I would get very stressed and very sad and then very angry
Yeah.
that, you know, I'm trying to just like also like in writing, in my writing process to kind of like think about, you know, the future, to kind of just mitigate expectations, to be like, you could be okay with just like 10 people reading the thing you've wrote, you know, selling
Yeah.
10 books would still be an accomplishment. And I think kind of just trying to like, in a weird way, like lower any sort of expectations I have with like
Mhm.
what I will do or what I can do, because then I will be happier with the outcome that comes my way.
Right. No, I think that's definitely a good approach because I mean, I definitely always had, this idea that, oh, I was going to get an agent and then I was going to get this huge book deal and like it was going to be this big thing, and I
Mhm.
did get an agent and then, that like we were on submission for a while and my book didn't sell and then we parted ways and then I ended up doing the indie thing for a while and then I worked with a small press. It's like I think one thing that I've learned is that the publishing journey for everyone is completely different, like, and
Mhm.
it's gonna look totally different for everyone, and it's totally, there are pros and cons like to indie publishing or traditional or small press. Like every area of publishing has good things and bad things about it.
Right.
So, and I think like one of the most valuable things that I've learned recently is that for me, writing is a lot more important than publishing, you know.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish I had like learned that earlier in my career because I feel like it could have saved me a lot of like pain and stress. But,
Yeah.
you know, some of us are late bloomers, I guess.
It's okay. I'll take your lessons and your advice. I will do it for you.
Yeah,
I
yeah, you because you're like pretty young, so there you go.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I'm someone who also I'm like, I'll just roll with the punches. Like I I know the next questions are like, what are you working on now?
mhm,
So this kind of rolls into that. Like the novel I'm writing is like weird in the way that it is like both in the LGBT genre and sci-fi genre, and it's like it feels very niche. So like having realistic expectations also be like I'm writing something that's like that isn't usually the like sexy, I don't know, whatever's coming out right now stuff, and just
right.
being okay with that.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Is that like what you're revising?
Yeah. And right now, so like, man, I need to like save my blurb because I've said so many cool blurbs in the past, and every time I talk about my novel, I'm like, what did I say last time? Um, but basically, the novel is a story of a character named Julian who is a superhuman, a teenage superhuman, and she's exploring these themes of identity and like responsibility and activism, um, as she comes into her powers, kind of trying to figure out who she is and what she can do and what she can do or should do to help other people. But it has a lot of sci-fi themes, but it
Hmm.
also has these slower moments of being a young queer person who is sometimes in kind of like a smaller town and other times in a slightly like a bigger town that I think feels very I feel like even if I'm trying, if my setting is kind of just like vague, I don't mention states. I've made up all of the cities, but it feels very Midwestern no matter what I do.
Hmm.
So it's kind of different in setting and in genre, and in plot. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm like. Yeah, and so whoever wants to publish that, I will be happy for whoever wants to publish the weird and interesting book I'm churning out.
Right. Cool. Yeah, no, my cat's name is Julian, so I was super excited
I
to
saw
see.
that. Yeah.
And she's a girl cat too, which just always confuses people because people I guess think Julian is a boy name. So they're always like, "Oh, I thought she was a boy." Like my vet always says, "Oh, we will bring him up." And I'm like, "No. Use the right pronouns for my cat."
Yeah. Anytime that, I have this big 25-pound cat. You've seen pictures of this big boy.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
His name is Moody. He has one eye. He's 25 pounds. He's the biggest gosh dang cat you've ever seen. He's like an orange. I don't know what I don't know cats. I was a dog person growing up. He's a big
Like a
orange cat.
tabby.
Tabby, yeah, so he's built like a linebacker, but also he's just got this big belly. Anytime that the vet ever if they're like, oh, she, and I'm like, it doesn't matter, he's a cat. Cats don't really have gender. Like, cats' perception of gender, especially like house cats, like it's nothing. It's nothing at all. I'm like, you can call my cat whatever.
Oh yeah. No, I'm definitely projecting my own
Oh yeah.
stuff onto my cat. So it's okay.
No, I always laugh as people in gender, sometimes people get very like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about, your cat dog. And I'm like, they don't know. They don't know.
Yeah, they really don't. I think my cat thinks she's a dog half the time anyway.
Yeah.
So okay, what like books or TV shows, movies, music, etc. are you really into right now?
Right now I'm watching Teen Wolf. I say that with a little bit of, I feel like I'm supposed to be embarrassed of Teen Wolf.
No, I've never watched Teen Wolf, but I love the Vampire Diaries.
Oh yeah.
I feel like teen supernatural shows are just, there's something very comforting about them.
I think I'm on like season 3 now. And I watched the first season and I was like, this was very well like encapsulated, and then things get very, very quickly in the next season very weird. And I'm like, okay, well, it's still very interesting, but I'll kind of in my head be like, Teen Wolf officially was 1 season, and then it just there's another thing called Teen Wolf that was like more. It is a lot of fun though. It's it's that like supernatural teenager angst, mystery solving stuff.
Yeah.
And as someone also pointed out, that it was kind of like that first kind of like CW style TV show.
Yeah.
And I've watched most of the CW like superhero shows, stuff like that. Like traditionally, I've been very into. I'm listening to podcasts mostly that are from McElroy family, because I'm a basic podcast listener. Also, like I'm really I'm just a nerd through and through. So like I'm listening to The Adventure Zone by some of the McElroys, which is just like a D&D podcast.
Oh, cool. That's fun.
Yeah, that's that's kind of stuff that I'm like watching right now and listening to right now.
That's cool. Okay, so I have kind of a big question that I ask everyone on the podcast. So why do you think art is important?
Art is something that I think is something that everyone can relate to. It draws that emotion from us. In my opinion, like the most successful, not in like a profitable way, but like art that has like a lasting impact or has an like important impact on someone is something that connects to them, that gets in their brains and makes them feel a certain way, makes them think about the world differently. Art also, like when there's a lot of art coming out, that society is going to be okay. It feels like kind of reassuring to be like, as humans, like we're still going to create stuff that matters to us, that tells a story and tells about our lives, that I think can have, this sounds very like hippy dippy to be like, and it breaches barriers. But, I think art sometimes can reach people that you wouldn't ever be able to talk to normally.
Right. No, I'm totally hippy dippy, so it's all good. No, but I like that. It's like it is a good way to connect to people, because I mean you think about like music and how the same piece of like instrumental music, especially like people all over the world that speak different languages could get something out of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's really cool, like the universality of art. So where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, I am on Twitter. That's the only like public social media I have. It is my first and last name, just at Aryn Huck.
And I will link to that on findcreativeexpression.com as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and if I get published some places, I will post links to that. I have some stuff that's on like student publications through the University of Nebraska at Lincoln while I was there.
Well, everyone go follow Aryn on Twitter because the revision tweets, I find them very enjoyable.
Yeah, every few days and it's always at 1 a.m. So it's really when you get up the next morning, you'll see tweets from me where I'm like, once again, I'm updating my thread at 1 in the morning. I am trying. I'm trying. It's just, that magic time for me is 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. that I'm like, yes, my brain is working.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. That was really fun.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you. Thanks for listening to me ramble. This was great. I love talking about writing and art and stuff. So thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah. Thanks so much for, coming and talking creative process. I had such a great time talking to Aryn, and I hope you all enjoyed it as well. Coming up on the next episode, I'm going to be chatting with playwright and painter Lainey Kennedy. Lainey is super creative and also really talented, so you definitely want to catch that. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Find Creative Expression podcast. Please leave the podcast a review on your favorite podcast platform so that other people can find us as well. Thanks so much for supporting the podcast, supporting indie artists, and I'll see you in 2 weeks for the next episode.